a good year, and that's not necessarily 8 hours a day every day, but that's a good year of dedicating most of my thoughts and time and energy into the research aspect of it. But I'm also writing it as I go along. So, I do a fair bit. It's so it's hard to really put like a time frame on it because technically reading stories is research in my
Yeah,
line of work,
exactly.
right? So, like, technically, just by reading folk tales, I'm kind of doing research. And then, you're looking for something and you grab a book from the shelf and then you just get lost in the story and then you're kind of lost in that. And then that might inspire you to go in a different direction. So, I mean, I spend a good deal of time. I mean, like the books of the bazaar, like those are all like weird facts and stuff like that. Those took a really long time. Those took a really long time. And I actually had like help with those. Like I had people at the book publisher who were helping me research all the different topics and sending me articles and things like that because there was just no way to once we got the book contract, it was like, okay, it's going to come out by this, we need it by this date. And I was like, well, this was just an idea, like, oh shit, I got to write all this. So that took a lot. That was intense. But with the like folklore and stuff, I mean, that's some of that I just is just me writing. And that I enjoy because it's given me a way to kind of write my own stories within this template. And it's not,
This stuff is hot right now too. Neil Gaiman's kind of writing about mythology and folklore and how people are, attuned to the old gods or the new ways or this, that, and the other thing. It's I don't know. Going to do fiction or is it going to be another nonfiction
I
book?
don't know. I mean, I have a fiction novel in the works. Like, if you've ever met a writer that doesn't have a fiction novel in the works, they're
Yeah,
probably not legit, right? We
yeah.
all have one in the works at all times.
One, I
So
have
I,
three.
I
Yeah.
yeah, I have one like actually in the works, as in I've written some of it. It's not just floating around in my mind. But that's not something I would approach my current publisher with. They're not a fiction publisher, and I think it would be quite a departure. It's horror fiction, obviously. So I'm working on that. But I'm not working on it in like I'm dedicating my all to it because I have a couple of other ideas that I've been looking into, both of which will require extensive research. So I think I'm just trying to formulate exactly how I would do that before I propose it. Because if you propose it to somebody and they're like, "Yeah, go for it, great, green light," then you have to actually execute your idea. And I just need to know that it's something I can do. But I will say one of the ideas involves pirates, and
Awesome.
the other idea is relating to botany. So those are my two different directions there.
Well, I look forward to your newest book
Yeah, what
coming
about
out.
you? You got what's happening with
I
your
have no clue.
writing?
I'm holding on the two novels right now. I have no clue what to do with them. I'm afraid to go into indie publishing with them, put them up my own.
Have you sent them to any publishers?
No, I wrote query letters to agents.
You did.
I did a
Oh,
long time ago, and
what
it
about
didn't
like
result in
actually?
anything.
Hmm.
So I've been basically sitting on it and just writing.
Yeah.
And I started this, having conversations with professional writers like yourself a year ago, trying to figure out what everybody's doing, and this has turned into a monster all on its own. Just
So what genre are you? I mean, is it just fiction? Like what's the
I like speculative fiction, the whole umbrella, fantasy, science fiction, even some horror, macabre, stuff like that.
so and what are your novels about?
The first one is more of a literary exploration of the opioid epidemic, involving a Nigerian child soldier illegally in this country working for organized crime and a young woman who lived most of her life addicted to drugs and is sober and kind of exploring the pull of freedom and money and friendship and family and things like that. And the second novel is more science fiction, dystopian America, kind of goes all
Well,
over the place.
here's what I would do is I would find a book that you think is like similar to yours, like not necessarily exactly the same, but that touches on something that you like. And I would just send an unsolicited manuscript to the publisher.
To the publisher, right? I
Yeah,
don't
just
know.
go
That's
straight. What's going to happen? They're going to reject you. If they reject you, they're not going to remember you. So you can always send it again if you've made changes. It's not like, well, here's the
the
thing.
problem for me though is,
It's moldering where it is.
well,
No,
yeah,
nobody's gonna just call you up and be like, "So, I heard you wrote a novel.
I
Can you
know
send it
exactly.
to me?" Somebody might reject it, but they're not gonna even have the chance to read it if you don't actually put it out. And there are a lot of indie publishers that aren't self-publishing. There are a
Yeah,
lot of little tiny imprints that aren't part of the big conglomeration of, the big publishing houses that have, maybe not enough money to make you wealthy, but enough money to publish your book and give you a decent royalty rate. And then here's this thing that's been sitting on your desk, and you get, y- you get a few quid a year from it. So,
it's interesting. I don't even know if I
I,
trust the publishers themselves anymore. Like, I don't trust agents. I mean,
oh
it's like
no, you
I feel
shouldn't
like that
trust agents.
dude who
No, no,
doesn't
no.
work
You
out
should
because he doesn't want to get too swole or something.
You shouldn't trust agents, but you can trust publishers. I mean, I've never, uh, I mean, I think publishing is probably one of the more trustworthy. As Here's the thing, if you don't, you won't even get to the contract stage until you have an idea of what they're going to want to do
Mm,
to your book. And if you're to that stage, then you would have a very strong understanding. Now, for me, because technically my books are um, nonfiction, it's a little different because it's more, it's a little easier to say chapter this is this and with fiction, I think it is a whole kind of different experience, and and especially with science fiction, and maybe this is a route to go instead of messing around with your first one that you feel you hold a little more dear. Something like science fiction, there's a ton of smaller science fiction press,
yeah,
like Tor Publishing and places like that that are
well, Tor's huge, and
no, but
the other problem
they're
is,
not Penguin. You
no,
know
they're
what
not
I mean?
Penguin. They're
So
probably an imprint of somebody though. I don't think they're next like not actually Tor anymore. But anyway,
are they
it almost
okay? I
seems
mean,
like
they're always kind of it's like Amazon. They're just eventually all going to be part of Amazon.
or whatever is like three generations after that and everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other problem is the era that we're currently living in is very not white male oriented, I think.
But I think literature is something that transcends race, gender, class, and always has.
Hmm.
So, what I'm hearing from you, and in a
Is
year
I
of
love a lot
having
of them.
conversations with you, is that you're giving me a lot of excuses
Yeah, I have no
why
clue.
you
I
don't
really
want to.
don't.
And I think you could.
I just don't know what
I'm
to do.
The best thing that could happen at this point is that, I mean, the best thing could happen is somebody would be like, "Oh, I love it. We're going to give you a book contract." But the best thing that could happen maybe is for you to get a little feedback on it. If you've
Yeah,
not heard anything, right? Like if you haven't heard anything, and I don't know, I don't have an agent, so I got a good workaround for agents.
it's very true. When I wrote the thing, I didn't think that I'd get stuck in this groove that I'm in right now. Not groove, but hole of it's not done yet. I was like, I'm done. That's it. I'm finished with this novel. And now I'm looking at it going, oh man, maybe I should do another pass. Just
Oh,
one more quick pass, fix some problems that I think might exist, and then send it out. And since that point, I've written I have millions of words worth of short fiction and another novel, and I'm on my third, fourth, and fifth novel. Kind of wondering what am I going to do? This is ridiculous. I don't know if I'm going to publish next year myself. I don't know if I'm going to start sending out to publishers. I'm not sure what the most reasonable thing for me to do here is.
Well, you got to do something.
Well, I'm doing podcasts
Yeah.
and sending short fiction to magazines. That's basically my thing right now.
Oh, well, so there you go. So, I mean, I can tell you that in my times when I worked as an acquisitions editor for a book publisher, I constantly combed through magazines, trade publications or things that were related to the subject. So let's say I was trying to acquire a book about, tarot reading or something like that.
Mm.
I would look in like Wicca magazine or whatever, I would look in and read articles online, and I would look for people that didn't have a book yet that I could, entice over to the publisher that I worked for, who didn't have a lot of money but had a lot of credibility.
Exactly. I mean, I feel like conversations start in the weirdest places sometimes. You never know where they're going to end up. And if I don't, send my stuff out there to, send it blindly to a publisher might approach me someday based on a short fiction piece that I published or a contest that I was in, or maybe even a podcast that I did.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. It's true. And that's what acquisitions editors are meant to do. I mean, of course, you get a giant basket of things that are sent to you and unsolicited and solicited. And, like, the perfect scenario is this thing that comes through and it's quite polished. And what's more important than, I mean, I did nonfiction, so I wasn't acquiring fiction. But what was more important was that the person was able to present it in a way, the writing was good, and then the whole package was there. So it didn't really matter if the person had been published before, but it was more important that they had a way to promote themselves, that they had a really strong understanding of the market and what kind of stories they liked and what they didn't like, and their kind of vision of the whole thing was as important as anything. And
mm,
and there were several books that I published that came directly out of, we called it over the transom, because back in the day you used to just chuck your manuscript over the transom into the publishing office and hope that Hearst picked it up, or whoever the hell. So that's where it came from. It was like over the transom, and we had this whole basket. Every editor had one, and you sifted through it and you found something. And sometimes there were hidden gems. And I mean, that's, hey, JK Rowling's whole story, right? Like, that's
right.
her whole story. She was over the transom, and it was an assistant who pulled it out and said, this is really good, and got sucked into the story.
Which is
So,
the most important part. I mean, that if people are getting sucked into your fiction, then you've got bigger issues than finding a publisher. I
yep.
mean, it's all about storytelling and, you know, it's about the writing, honestly. It's about being as good as possible. I mean, I've talked to some authors who just churn like video game books and, you know, toy books and things of that nature. I'm just not that type of author at all. So, I mean, I don't have a niche other
Well,
than, genre fiction is
yeah,
basically my niche. But
yeah.
if I'm not getting in the Clark's world, I hardly doubt that, Tor is going to publish me. But if I can get in the Clark's world, that means must be my prose is decent enough for Tor to look at me and give me some consideration.
Right, right.
I work with so many authors on, a daily. I see so many writers who just um, probably aren't going to publish their stuff. There's a lot of people out there.
Yeah. Well, and even, I mean, like, to me, the prospect of trying to actually find a publisher for my fiction is terrifying.
Yeah, right. I
Because,
guess it is. It's really scary to think. I mean, that's
yeah,
why I send out to
because it's
magazines. I
a
mean, to get that
total
rejection,
departure.
but
It's a complete departure. Like, I mean, I have lots of fiction or lots of writing in my stories, and in all of my books. I wrote them all, and then there are individual stories that I crafted from, the for all the introductions, and then all the, I mean, I wrote the books. But writing a fiction story and finding a publisher for that, I mean, I couldn't go to my publisher. And so essentially, even though I'm the author of 9 books, I'm really starting out from scratch, because it's a
Mhm.
totally different experience. And
You
Yeah.
also have that experience already built up too. You have kind of a following.
Oh, it's not that big, but yeah.
Uh, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I'm not quite sure. It's the
People don't know
product.
me that well. I don't have a following, but some of my books have a following, and that's more important, right? Like the Mermaid book. People just love that book. It's my best-selling. I mean, people love it. And do I make, like people writing to me and saying, "Oh, I loved your Mermaid." It's just I that I can tell by the numbers that that is the the best-selling book, and that's great. I mean, that's better to me than somebody saying, "Oh, I liked your Facebook page," I was like,
Yeah.
"Ah, great." But
Facebook.
yeah,
I think you're
Facebook.
supposed to delete your Facebook page now. I think that's the thing everybody's doing.
I know, it's the thing everybody's doing, and then that makes me not wanna do it because everybody's doing it, so,
I'm such a non-entity on Facebook. It doesn't even matter if I delete my page.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I do have a lot of that's how I communicate with, radio interviews and things like that. And I think my publisher would have a straight up fit if I deleted my Facebook page right before my book came out.
You have an interesting career though, because you've been a lot of places in terms of media. You've been on the radio, you've been interviewed, you've put stuff together.
I've
How
done a couple television shows actually.
television shows. And
That was a
then,
weird experience. That was
but I guess
weird.
you're writing from before Facebook, 2007-ish. That's where Mermaids came out.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Way before. Did Facebook I'm trying to when did Facebook even start?
I call it 2007. I think that's
Yeah,
when I got
so
my
well,
first invitation email.
I got the second book of the bazaar here. Let me look at the copyright page. I don't remember Facebook being a player. Okay, so the Book of the Bazaar 2, Beyond Bazaar, was 2010. And
And that's the Mermaid book.
no, the Mermaid book was, I think, 2013. 2008 was the Book of the Bazaar, and then the Mermaid book. Oh, it's right here under my wine glass. We have
What were you doing? No, I'm
such
joking.
a slob.
Yeah,
Okay,
with a
2013.
concussion too.
So by then, yeah, they say not to drink. So by then, Facebook was a thing, but I had already done the Book of the Bazaar, and that was before So the publication date on that is 2008, but
But you're
Facebook
already
was
written.
not a thing then.
You
So
weren't planning on
so
the marketing, including a Facebook.
that book was like one of the old school books. So that book was like Barnes and Noble loved it.
Uh-huh.
And that's why that book did so well. Barnes and Noble loved it. The real bookstores loved it. By the
They're
second book,
gone.
it became more important how your book was doing on Amazon because Amazon was like outselling other places. And some social media was important at that point, but not so much. And then by Among the
2007 is when
Mermaids and
the
yeah, by
last
like
book of
2013, that was all pretty important. But it just so happened that it was just such a perfect like, the timing was good. It was actually a little before its time because mermaids have been very trendy the last couple of years, so I think that's why it's kinda gotten a resurgence. But it got picked up in a couple of catalogs.
but you're not writing to be trendy though. You're writing
Oh
to
god, no. I
because you're
mean, that's
interested in
why
the
I'm
subject.
not wealthy and why I can't quit my day job. Yeah, I mean, I'm writing the stuff that I like, and I think that that's that's how you have to be as an artist. I'm not saying if a publisher called me up and said, "We really want you to write a book all about, Victorian detective writers," I would be like, "Cool, all right, I can do that." We think Victorian detective writers are having a renaissance. Okay, that's fine. That's the publisher's job to find the things that are the renaissance. My
Mhm,
job as an artist is to be an artist and create what I
exactly.
think is important to create and what comes out of me, and that's the job of
Really
any
want you to
artist
be
and any
writing
writer.
a
Yeah.
book on Victorian.
If you set out to write thinking you're writing a bestseller, you will be crippled by disappointment.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, how could you aim for something like that unless you're a Stephen King? I mean, there's pretty much everything he writes ends up on the New York bestseller list.
Now
Yeah.
but his first bestseller, he didn't write it to make it be a bestseller. He wrote it because it was inside of him. and he had to write it. I mean, he was a writer. He knew he was a writer at his core, and so he had to create this thing. He lived, he was an English teacher, and lived
Yeah.
in a humble abode, and was not by any means a wealthy man. But he wrote what was true to him and stayed true to his own vision, and that's all you can do. That's why so many of us die paupers, but
No, it's very true.
pauper with integrity.
Well, I don't need no integrity. I
At least you
gave
don't
that
have
up
to
a
worry
long
about the
time ago.
grave robbers if you die a pauper.
No, that's very true. I've already told my wife I want to be buried naturally, South Jersey in the Pine Barrens.
Sky burial for you. Yeah.
Sky Bear, isn't that horrible? I watched pictures of that.
I don't know if I would watch pictures of that, but I think as a concept, it makes a lot of sense to me because it's the quickest way to just get it done.
Get it over with.
I
They don't
like
really
the
have to
one
do
where you
anything.
get buried and then like a tree, the tree goes right into your grave and like wraps around your bones and stuff. I really like that.
Interesting. What
Mhm.
does the physical form have any bearing on the afterlife in your beliefs?
You mean like if you were a cat versus a human?
No, I meant like in terms of how you treat your body. I mean, I know
Oh,
you kind of said you're going to give
oh,
your remains to the body
that
farm, but
that is a deep and inspiring question to ask because that makes me think, are people who are incredibly abusive to their bodies and die of overdoses, are they more likely to be ghosts,
mm,
or can it be because sometimes people say it's someone who's like died under duress or whatever's happened on this earth they're not finished with, and so they're in like a repeat or a loop. I've heard a lot of theories like that.
yeah, I've heard that
Don't
too.
know if they're totally spot on, but I mean
No, we don't know anything, do we? That's why there's so much literature on death.
that's what's so fun. That's the funnest part about life. We know
I mean, it's very
nothing.
true. When you are addicted to something, you have a hunger that never goes away. You never satiate it. So, I mean,
Right.
you're going to
So, I mean,
die of
are you
that.
more, or are you such a tormented soul here that you finally do get the peace that you need when you finally pass away? So uh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much your physical form or how you treat your body. Um,
I love the,
if you look at like reincarnation, or if you look at some of the like more East Indian or like Hindu
well,
ideas
even
of
like
what
the new age
happens.
attitudes. I mean, they say that if you get stuck in your religious dogma, you're just going to go to what you think is, the afterlife, waiting for your real afterlife. What was it? Richard Matheson's book, What Dreams May Come. He kind of wrote about Christians going to, Summerland and waiting to actually die to go to heaven, but they're actually dead already, wasting
Right.
their chance at eternal happiness or whatever, by
Right.
waiting for eternal happiness. I mean, it is kind of funny how
Yeah.
your delusions in life can potentially stain your death. I like that a
Right.
lot.
But ultimately, right, that's everybody's fear too. Nobody wants purgatory. People will take hell over purgatory. They don't want to be in that like middle ground of like, am I dead? Am I going to go up to heaven? Like, am I just stuck here? And a lot of people think that purgatory is actually staying on earth, that this is purgatory. That's the ghosts are in purgatory. It's a bit like it's a punishment or something. I don't know that I believe that because I think that there have been many stories and even my own experiences where it feels more like a message. And whatever that message is, I mean, it's like a sign. It's like, just this is not necessarily, I'm not saying God told me to do this, or, great grandma said blah blah blah, but it's like that tap on the forehead. It's like, hey, wake up. You need to pay attention to something that's happening around you right now. What is that? Why are you having these thoughts? Why are you thinking that there's, something, an entity in your house right now? What is happening in your life that you need to pay attention to? Something's trying to get your attention. It could just be you trying to get your own attention, like you're not taking care of yourself,
Oh.
or death is nigh, or whatever.
Death is nigh. Well, I mean, stay on your feet, you'll be okay.
It could happen.
Man, it's fascinating. I really do like the idea. I mean, playing around with the idea of math too and chaos and how things add up in terms of the afterlife, what we are as species. I mean, it's so crazy to think that a million years ago there wasn't what we are, and a million years from now there won't be
Or
what we are either. I mean, it's like
or
we're
will
just
there be, or was there?
I don't know. That's the question, huh? Nobody knows. I mean, you can get into an intense argument with somebody about the pyramids
Right.
in Giza, about who made them and why they were there, or this, that, and the other thing, what's inside or underneath the Sphinx. There are no guarantees that we are even what we think that we are 100% because there's no other creatures on this planet that evolve like us.
We could all like just like peel our skin away and be lizards underneath. Like that could happen, right? Like V could happen.
Yeah, but I mean, we're not though, are we? We're fish.
How would we know?
And we're, I think,
We
how
don't
do they
know
know we
until
are
it happens,
fish?
really.
I don't know.
And those are the
Evolution is a
greatest
crazy
stories,
subject.
though. And those are the greatest books, are the ones that give you just enough realism to make you think that it's plausible. And I mean, we talked about Stephen King earlier. Like, he's an excellent example of, he goes some really weird places.
Yeah.
Giant, like, spiders in the sewers that become any kind of like worst nightmare, like crazy things, right? And yet you believe it because it's the Joe Schmo that it's happening to. It's the average guy. He puts you in the thoughts of your character, and your character has something relatable. He's just not always like the nicest person, but like you have this kind of empathy for them. And that's a really important part of writing and literature, is like you have to, if I don't feel something for the character, I will stop before, I'll stop with one chapter to go. And I have to give you an example that would probably upset people, but the Wind Up Bird Chronicles. I read that for as long as I possibly could, and then I didn't. I thought, I really, this has been hyped up. Okay, I'm going to read this. It's supposed to be amazing. Yeah, the writing's fine, right? Halfway through it, I'm like, and I know something's going to happen. Two-thirds of the way through it, I've given up. I've just given up. And I actually never read the end of that book. And that's the only time in my life that I have not finished a book, that I've gotten that far in, because I completely and utterly stopped caring. And
Would
I'm
you
not
treat
tearing that
your
writer apart. I'm just saying that
no?
that is the trick, and it's subjective. It's completely
Do you
subjective.
treat your subjects as a character when you write about mermaids? As a mermaid, the subject of a mermaid, is that your character that carries you through, or how do you create a through line for one of your works?
Well, I usually have a theme. So I work on themes. And then, I have an umbrella theme, and then everything goes underneath that. So it's a little different for me as a writer. That's why writing fiction is a totally different prospect, and can be a very frightening prospect, because I love to write. I am a writer. I've written a lot of fiction. I haven't published a lot of fiction. I've published a lot of
What makes it scary though? I'm sitting here racking my brain. I love it so much. When I write, I just can't
what's
wait to get it.
what's
And this is with grammatical errors too. Like I am not a grammatician. I have no clue most of the rules that govern our language. I did not learn them somehow, but I still will write something and I cannot wait to share it. Fear
um
does not enter the equation at all when it comes to that. It's like a
I don't
blissful,
feel
freeing
that way
feeling.
about any of the books that I've written. And I hadn't felt that. In fact, I'm quite proud of them when I'm finally done with them. Although, of course, like any artist, I read back through them and I cringe sometimes, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, why did I write? Oh
Yeah.
God, why did I put it that way? God, I'm so verbose. But with the fiction, I think it's just a bigger challenge to me, because it's if you're picking up a book about mermaids, you're already you're in it, right? You're interested in it.
You're
You
a built-in
know that
audience.
it's about mermaids. You know that this book is about fairies. You've got, now it's never going to sell like a New York Times best-selling fiction writer, because it's a niche, right? When you have a work of fiction, all you have is your title and your book cover. Nobody knows anything beyond that except what other people are telling them.
Yeah.
So that is kind of, the idea that it's not, I wouldn't say scary might not be the right word, but it's a little intimidating because it's a vast there it could just go in any direction. Also with the novel that I'm working on, I have all the characters and I have the end and the beginning and some of the middle, but I haven't quite hammered out the why it's all happening. And
Mm.
that to me has to be plausible in some way, even if it's, supernaturally plausible. I could tell you as somebody who, has studied the occult most of her life, when I read a lot of these sort of trashy, dark novels, I get instantly irritated whenever something's blamed on, Satan or witches. It's like, oh, please, come on. You haven't evolved over the last 450 years to blame everything on Satan or witches. Like, let's be a little more creative here. So
Yeah.
it's, but like I said, there is always the ghost loophole that you can introduce where, you know, ultimately it fills it.
Well,
Well,
Lovecraft wrote a pantheon of gods, like hundreds and hundreds
oh
of
yeah. Yeah.
deities, whatever. None of his bad guys had any point. They didn't really want anything. They were just benign in their evil or making people crazy or whatever they were. I
Right. It
mean,
was
he,
usually more as punishment for the like protagonist
yeah.
somehow. Or being a regular guy or losing their loved one, but there is always that psychological element that you need in there. Why is this person so vulnerable to this? Why? Because something has happened to them and they're vulnerable and they're susceptible to these dark forces or whatever.
Are you just writing the one work of fiction, or are you working on others
I
too?
have only one work of fiction that I'm working on, but I have two other nonfiction books that I'm
I'm very proud of
on the
you.
outline.
I cannot write one piece of fiction. I have to
Well,
have.
I have
I'm
a couple
unfortunately
others
one
in
of
my
those dumb
head,
people that have like
so I
hundreds of
understand
books
that.
working.
Yeah, I have a couple others in my head, but as far as what I've actually put on paper, I mean, I have things like lots of things that are unfinished or unpublished. I mean, but those are like, sitting in a stack. Those aren't something I'm actively working on. But like, right, as far as writing like one thing at a time with nonfiction, I mean, like I said, I'm writing two other books out right now, but the fiction is I kind of made myself do that, to be honest, Brian, because I am totally a person that starts things and doesn't finish them
Oh,
unless I have a deadline. So I with fiction, because I don't have a deadline, I actually so I have two huge ideas and I just had to pick one of them to act because what was happening is I was making notes and bouncing back and forth and it's all the scraps of journals and I just said, okay, if you really want to like write this into a story, pick one and stay with it and
mm.
then you can go on to the next one and always put those ideas down but focus on one. And I just had to kind of force myself to focus because otherwise I won't ever finish it. And then I'll get a book deal for another book, another nonfiction book, and it'll
And
totally
it gets
sidetrack
buried.
me.
Yeah.
Right. So I thought, well, this is a good hiatus. We'll see how the paranormal parlor book does. And then in the meantime, maybe I can dedicate the time I'm not writing something like that to
It's very true. I mean, honestly, if you can't just dive into that one singular work and decide that's what I'm going to work on for the next 6 months, it's very hard to finish it.
oh we'll yeah, if you're not actually working on it, you'll never finish it.
Unfortunately, the one I'm working on now, I'm writing a lot of short fiction, end it, and I find myself not even touching it on a monthly basis. Like, oh,
Mm.
I didn't write one single word into that novel, but I wrote, four short stories.
Well, what's the end game? The end game is to be a writer, and that's
Yeah,
somebody who writes.
yeah.
So as long as there's forward momentum there, I think it's a positive thing. And that's, but I mean, like any writer, I beat myself up about mistakes and ideas that I don't think are going to work. And, um, things will come out beautifully in my head and then I forget them by the time I'll be out walking. And I've had to keep a little notebook in my pocket because I'll think of something and it's the perfect sentence. And by
Uh-huh.
the time I get to
There's
any
no such thing.
thing, it's like, gosh, I already forgot that.
I mean, I don't know who said it, but getting something down is the first step to having a finished work. I mean, going back and editing it and working on it is the most important part of the writing. Getting it
Right.
down though is the hardest.
Getting it down is the hardest. And the editing part, you save that for the times when you're not inspired because you've
Mm-mm.
already got the bones of something, right? So that's what
No,
I
I mean, I'm
mean.
always editing. That's always part of it. I'm not one of those people that can just write all the way through. Like, this is my first draft. No, I'm writing and I go back to the beginning again and I work on a chapter one from a fresh start and then chapter two from a fresh start. And I'm like, damn it, I need to start this story from another chapter one. That was my last novel. Just constantly going back to the beginning and adding work to it.
Okay,
So,
so rewriting that first. So I feel that I'm not saying that the storyline is linear. In fact, it's anything but linear, but I found that I have to kind of write out like what happens next. And to be totally honest with you, sometimes I just write the words, here's what happens next. And I just write the concept of it. I don't even try and
mhm,
make it beautiful. And that is very different than the way that I ordinarily write and the way that I write all the books that I've written. I have a genre, I have research, and then I take that and I write some kind of inspirational thread to bring it all together. And then I
mhm,
retell these stories and then I write in the facts. And then I have like usually quotes that I'll copy and paste in toward the end. And there's some like fine tuning like that. But writing something of nonfiction that's based on research, you kind of have something to go on and you do a lot of
mhm.
moving around and stuff like that, but you don't have that. Like you got to go, what chapter happens next? But you don't say like what actually happens next. Like all I got to was
Mhm.
the door and she opened the door. Like I don't know what happens next. And so I
And then
love
go back
that
to I
adventurous
would go
part of
back
it.
to the beginning and start reworking that section until I realize where I went wrong. That I don't know what's happened. Something's happened where my story has gone out of my control. Why don't I know
Oh,
what
that's
happened next?
interesting. Okay, so
So I
because
go
what
back to
I
the
do is
beginning.
I just think about it and then I might just like I'll skip in other words, I'll skip that part. Like I'll say what happens next is, A, B, or C. I think that this is what happens, but I need to tell this other part of the story and I'll work on that. And then it starts to make sense. And sometimes I throw out sections of it and that's not actually plausible. But I don't like to, if I stop myself too much and I restart, but I like that idea of going back. I've not really done that where you go back and just revise from the beginning to just kind of like, okay, let's see how the story can go. And maybe it's because I haven't quite gotten all the way through it yet. And when I
I
do
feel
get
like
all the
it's
way
like
through
a
it,
long jump. You know what I mean? Where you take that running start to get to wherever you're stopped at, and
yeah.
and you might have a false start. You have to go back and start again. I cannot just
Okay, so
dive
I'm making like a sand angel. I'm just like
in.
plop. Okay, let's just try all these things at once.
And that's the best
So
thing though, because then you look at your word count and you go, great, now I can start the editing. Now I can really start shaping this and breaking it down into beats and character movements and who
oh
do I
God,
want to.
I can't even think about to like that. I can't. I will leave that to somebody far more intelligent and experienced than me to like. I just have to like write it out. I can't think about technical literary things.
Well, I can't think of that stuff either. I'm just saying, I mean, it's like the
Somebody's gonna
natural,
think of it. Yeah. No, it's
it's the,
natural. Yeah. Yeah.
the natural
Nailed it.
storytelling thing.
I'm just like, yeah, pat myself on the back. Got that one done.
At
All
least you
right.
try anyway. I mean, that's the most important part. Who knows what you're
Now, when
actually
somebody
doing?
wants to interview me about it, of course, I'll talk about my incredible technique. But
Your incredible
yeah,
fiction writing technique.
yeah, you and I both know it's bullshit.
It's
But
my
let it be
technique.
known. It is on
Six,
record.
1 o'clock in the morning, just getting
Whatever
put
I
on my
say
desk,
10 years from now is a lie.
just making it up to sound important.
Complete lie.
Well, I enjoyed talking with you this evening.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, always a
Yeah.
pleasure. How's your podcast going?
It's just a complete and utter standstill,
Oh,
just as it was last month and the month before. And it's completely through my own not doing. It's really, I just have not made it a priority. It's difficult for me to do sound editing. I struggle with it, and I struggle with getting it right. So I did it. I edited the episodes. They happened to be episodes that needed quite a bit of editing, and I just was not happy with it. It was really sounded crappy to me, and I just decided that I need to probably go back to the drawing board a little bit, because rather than crank out a bunch of stuff that I don't, it's, I have two choices. I can just do it and have it have shitty sound quality and just be like totally seat of my pants and whatever, or I can go back to the drawing board and try and find a way to make it exactly what was in my vision from the beginning. And that involves a little bit of tweaking. But I have a strong lead on a new, I might have somebody that can at least help. Somebody who produces a podcast as someone that I really admire is putting me in touch with his producer, basically, and we're going to have a conversation about what, how in the hell you even do this shit, basically. And you know, it's not, I mean, for me it's like simple things like, how do I record this and get good sound quality? How do I then translate? I mean, I have all the tutorials, I know the actual steps, but there's something about having someone else that I'm accountable to that helps me motivate. And honestly, like, I love the creative idea. I love the booking guests. I love talking to people. I love interviewing. I love it. I just don't like doing all the other stuff, like editing it, putting in like music, copying and pasting HTML codes, like, ugh. So,
this is the worst part for me, the actual talking.
oh, really? You're so good at it. That's so
I
funny that you
can't
say
stand
that.
this is against the grain for me. I am not a talker. I avoid
That is
interacting
not
with
true.
people.
I
Oh, I
don't
swear to
believe
God.
that. I don't
I'm
believe that
not
at
a
all.
I am an introvert like you would not believe. I do not like talking to people. I hate getting stuck into that conversational black hole.
You don't
But
sound like an introvert.
it's all pretend, isn't it?
Yep.
But I love the editing. I love the shaping of it and publishing it and making it all correct and right. I can't make you guys say anything. Sometimes I'll talk to a guest and they have nothing to say. I'll ask them a question and
But that's
they,
not always your
ah,
fault. I mean,
no,
sometimes people just don't, they don't
I
know how to.
scramble to avoid the dead air. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to say next? I'm so bored.
Oh God, I have not had that experience myself. I'm a space filler,
Mhm.
but I've talked to other, people who have interviewed me, and they've told me horror stories of like, when you, that's why places like the, big, um like coast to coast, they before they even book you, they do a pre-interview. And I've had a few radio stations do pre-interviews with me. It's not like a long thing, but it's usually like 10 minutes on the phone. They want to hear your voice. They want to make sure that you can answer questions. They want to make sure that you're not a total idiot and they don't talk
Mhm.
like this. I talk like this.
One of the reasons I really
So,
enjoy having you on the show is that, I can just turn you on and you'll go.
because I'm a blabbermouth.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's just like, oh,
Yeah.
this is great. This is like relaxed. I'll just let this podcast handle itself.
Well, this was a fun one because we didn't have any, we didn't really have an agenda. Like, and sometimes we say like, oh, hey, we want to talk about this specific thing because it goes with the month or the theme, or we picked a writer that we want to talk about or a work that we want to talk about. But this one, you were just like, let's just talk about whatever. So that's
I
always
mean,
fun
it's not,
because
it's you. It's what you like that we talked about. Your subject matters paranormal. I mean, I'm just really
right,
interested
right,
in it
right.
because I mean, you're interesting because you bring in the literary aspects to it as well.
Yeah,
You
because I'm
break
a total like nerd.
you break down the
Yeah.
culture. I mean, yeah, I love stuff like that. In fact, I think that should be your podcast, honestly. I mean, just geeking out for a week on a
Geek Week.
whatever you want to talk about.
It's Geek Week. Well, so what I've been doing, so I really like I like the concept of the podcast and I like where the direction that it's going. I just have to figure out how to do all the technical stuff because I really like the idea of right like this it's called Tales of the Strange. This season is um whenever I get the first 52 episodes recorded, not a small, I've got
Wow.
four. I've got four. Um it's state by state and it's strange, bizarre, um spooky, creepy,
What are you gonna do after
witchy,
the
like
50 weeks, though? When you told me that your idea, I'm like, oh man, that puts a
I
limit
guess
on things.
after, well, I mean, that's about a year at the rate I'm going. It's like 3 years from now, so I'm not too
Sure, but
worried about it.
you're gonna
But
start
then
publishing them, and it'll be
I'll
like a year's worth of content. You're like, oh damn, I spent 3 years making 52
yeah, so
podcasts.
probably what I'll
What
do
next?
is then I'll well there'll probably be a theme that shows itself to me in that, but there's also the international aspect of this of similar things. And then there are other underlying themes and very interesting people that like right now I have a lot of people that don't necessarily match a state. So I'm trying to figure out what their, so I don't know. Who knows what season two would be? I mean, season two could be all, it could be anything. It could be haunted trees. It could be all about haunted trees at this
Are there
point.
haunted trees?
You never know. I mean, that just came to me. I don't know. You never know
Trees
what
do
could
have
happen.
long lives. I would
Haunted
imagine they would
forests around the
hang
world.
on to it.
But I could go a little more global with the stories because a lot of the stories that I've researched are beyond the 50 states. But I really just like the idea of like, I wanted to call it the United States of Strange, but somebody has a book called that. And I didn't really want to, you can't, I mean, I could use it legally, I could use it, but in a tiny little pool of people who write about strange America, I don't need to take this title that somebody else already claimed. So, but I love the idea of the United States is strange. So it's just like a, bizarre America, my
Do you listen
favorite.
to a lot of paranormal, supernatural podcasts?
I try a lot of them. One of my favorite ones is this one. It's called Jim Harold's Campfire Stories, and I love it because it's just people calling in. He's a very lovely host, very gracious, very professional, very kind of has like one of those warm radio guy voices, and it's all people calling in and sharing their stories. And they reach out to him before, so it's not just like random callers. It's like so and so in Arizona, and they tell their story. And for the most part, the people that call in have listened to the show and they're good storytellers. And so it's people's experiences, their weird experiences. And there have been times when, you'll laugh, you'll get totally scared, but it's incredibly entertaining because it's campfire stories. So that's a really nice aspect of it. So I listen to that a lot. I love Jeff Ballinger's. He's got I think it's Belanger. I just totally gets mad when you say it wrong. He's got like a haunted New England. I like to listen to. So I don't listen to a ton of the paranormal because uh, I I don't know. They're just not all that good. But I listen to ones, and of course, like I'm turned on to ones when people interview me. I am turned on to a podcast I haven't heard of or something like that, and then I'll listen to it. So I like to, I'm not as interested in like all the like a lot of people that are interested in paranormal are really interested in like aliens and UFOs, and I'm just not that interested in that. So a lot of times with those sort of paranormal umbrella podcasts, you'll find like there'll be a bunch of like UFO stuff in there, and that's fine. Like it belongs there, and it's interesting to me. It's more interesting than like I don't know, reading about finance.
The
but but it's in the world of the paranormal, it's not a passion of mine. Other people are very passionate about it, and I will leave that to them. So, so sometimes you just kind of like weed that stuff out. Oh, and I love that podcast Lore. Have you heard that one?
No.
You would like that. That is the guys, it's basically he takes lore, legends, and he tells you kind of the legend, and then
Oh,
he kind of tells you stuff that was happening in history at the time. He totally speculates about,
I
but
think I've
he
heard him. Yeah.
his name is, I think it's Aaron Mankey. I always get his last name wrong. And I think,
He's
I
done
mean,
things like Robin Hood, where he broke down the whole myth of Robin Hood and where potentially that came from, or
yeah, I mean, it's
Robert Jordan. Not Robert Jordan. What's it? Robert Johnson at
yeah,
Crossroads.
it's funny that you just brought that up because somebody asked me about Robert Johnson last night. That's and I hadn't really thought about him for years. At the Crossroads, yeah, he's really interesting. And there, I guess there's a show. I haven't seen the show because I just listen to the podcast occasionally. But I like the way that he takes the stories and really looks at them from he's very logical, but he always leaves this little kind of open-ended thing at the end, and he obviously has a penchant for, the bizarre and the unusual, and he's a beautiful writer. So the podcast is kind of him just like reading what he wrote on the topic. It's like if I were to just pick up my book and read you, and all the time the lore podcast is like about stuff that I've written about. So it'll be like the Bell Witch or things like that I've written about. So they're topics I'm familiar with. And then I'll learn a little something from him that that was in his research, or like, how to pronounce something because, he asked how to actually say it or whatever, I'm just reading it. Um, but that's a really good one. I find that entertaining. The episodes aren't, I won't say they're redundant, but it's just his voice. There's no interviews or anything, so you can't always listen to like 6 of them in a row or something. You can't binge listen
Yeah.
because it's just all one person's voice, so there's no breakup. But there's always great topics, and yes, like spooky ones around Halloween, and it's lovely. He talks about werewolves, gets into vampire legends, all
It's
that
like
kind of good stuff.
you're perfect for podcasting, honestly. I mean, put you with somebody and just have a nice long conversation, and that's great. I would love to hear you talk to experts.
I thought that I was a little like, what's going to happen when I have to ask somebody things? And I found that it was just such a welcome relief to let somebody else do the talking, even though I'm like a total blabbermouth. But
Uh-huh.
like, I really enjoy, the interview process. I like being the interviewer, and I like asking people questions and seeing where their answers go. And, I mean, I do a fair amount of research before I talk to the person. So I'm not just pulling someone out of the aether. I've got an idea of what they're about. So I form my questions, but I don't tell them what the questions are going to be beforehand or anything like that. It's just like, I ask them to send me a bio. That's about it.
Yeah,
And
it's
but
about what I
if
do.
I'm
I look up people
interviewing them,
online.
right, and if you're interviewing
Yeah.
them, you've looked them up, so you know something about them, so there's something about them you're gonna wanna talk about. But, like,
Mhm.
I didn't know anything about the guy who was gonna tell me about the pharmaceuticals. It's a curator of a pharmaceutical museum in Arizona, and that episode's up, actually, and that was super interesting
Oh, so you're
because
actually publishing them, even
I
though
have 4 live ones and 2 in the can that I haven't published yet. So I've got, they're in alphabetical order. So,
see
Alabama,
you did it the most.
Alaska, Arizona, and Arkansas.
You did it the most difficult way possible. You
I know.
alphabetized your titles. They're in numerical order. They're going to be ghost stories from these particular
And
states.
my inner librarian will not let me read. So somebody said to me, just record them in any
Just
order you
record
want,
them.
right?
Just do it.
and then you don't have to, but my inner librarian really doesn't want me to release them in anything other than alphabetical order. But even when I with the producer, he was like, we might be pigeonholing ourselves a little bit if we can't get someone for Colorado. And that happened to us. The person we were interviewing for, I forget what state, backed out. So we just did the episode ourselves based on, stories and writing and stuff like that. And that was fine, but it wasn't the same thing as, interviewing the like head ghost investigator from this haunted mansion.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I put limitations on it, but to me, I needed those limitations to inspire me enough to actually do it. But you're right, I should just whoever I can book and get who said that yes, because I've got
Oh my God, it's so hard to
I
find
got a
somebody to
lady
give you
named
that
Bloody
word, that one
Mary.
simple one word, syllable word. Yes.
Right. So I've got a lady and a friend of mine. Her name is Bloody Mary, and she curates a haunted museum and is the voodoo queen of New Orleans. And she has said, "So when are we doing this interview?" But I'm
No.
like, "You're in. We can't.
No.
You're in."
The answer is
Yeah.
as soon as possible. Just get it
Yes.
done. I mean,
Yes. You're
that's, I
right.
guess, the
You're
difference
right.
between me and you is that I'm just pure chaos.
Mm.
I played football in high school and I was in the army, so I know what it feels like to burst through and make things happen because they need to happen.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's not
And
gonna be
I
pretty.
I
It's probably gonna
was
be
the
ugly, but
I was the smoking art nerd with a book. So
that's why I ended up turning into be.
who knows?
I was the jock with
Maybe
a
I'm
book.
okay. So maybe I'm going to become maybe I'll be, I need to enter my jock phase. Is that what you're saying? Just get it done.
I just think you just to get it done. I mean, that's the only way
Yeah.
these
You're
things work, I
right.
think.
You're right. You're right. That's actually, those are encouraging and inspiring words. You're right. And I have like really amazing, this woman who wrote a book called, she's amazing. She wrote a book called 109. I love this title. 199 cemeteries to see before you die. It's just
Oh,
like
that's good.
genius. You're genius. And it's doing great. She's written several books on cemeteries. Um, I was connected with her through some mutual friends, and she's wonderful and has agreed to, you know, interview. And she's just touching base with you. It's like I shouldn't have people asking me when I'm going to interview them. I should just fucking interview them.
Just
I just have
interview
to
them,
figure out
yeah.
how to record it. I think I know
Hang
now. So
out, right?
yeah, I
This
guess I
way.
could hang out. I have a uh, like a similar thing. It's like a Skype thing or whatever that you can
I
do
couldn't
that with.
figure out Skype. I did one interview over Skype and I lost my side of it. I just had the guy.
Really?
Yeah, and I lost him completely. I rebooked him. Like, oh, dude, we talked for like 90 minutes. It was like a great conversation. He was a Marine, Afghanistan vet or whatever.
Wow.
And he got pissed. He was like, nope, I'm doing your stupid podcast again.
Like those things I said, yeah, it
all
was a
those gems
one-time
are
deal.
gone.
That was a one-time deal. I had that happen, and it's just it's like you can't recreate it. You
No,
can never recreate that. You can't have that conversation again. You can try, and but it's going to be different because
yeah.
there are things that come out of an organic conversation that you can never replicate. So
Thankfully, it hasn't happened very often. Like three or four altogether out of the 115 that I've done so far have been bad. Like, could not use them bad. But they've all been done over Hangover too.
oh,
That's
okay, okay.
all over Hangover. I mean, yeah, the technical issues are kind of a headache at first, but get into the groove and it just kind of drives itself.
Yeah.
And it's nice.
Yeah.
I mean, I learn a lot from doing this, and I've been thinking about doing a third podcast. I just don't know what the subject is going to be on.
Interesting. Okay, because you've got the one on speculative fiction, right? And
Hmm.
then the other one is kind of more of like the beginning of things, right?
Yeah, I talk to an author or an artist and try to just figure out who they are. The
Right.
speculative one, like the one
Which
that
was
I
the
invite
first
you
one
on.
I did with you was Origins. That was the first time we ever talked was in Origins.
Hmm.
And that was
Yeah,
like a getting to know you kind of
it's
interview,
the
right?
easiest one to book people for too. This one's not as easy, or Mirage. It's kind of like, I don't want to talk about anybody specifically.
Because they want to talk about themselves. They don't want to talk about other people. right?
I
So like,
guess.
yeah, I'll tell you all about my creative process, but I don't really want to like talk about another author.
But neither
But
one of these podcasts are like blowing SEO out of the water or anything. I'm
yeah,
on a third
well, you
podcast
just
that
I
is going
know.
to capture those people who read, not the people who are writing, which is
I
what
know
these two are kind of
I'm
geared
like
towards.
I'm thinking about you and you've got okay, so you've got Mirage, which is speculative fiction. You've
That's one of my
got
that's my favorite one to do right now because it does
Origins,
take a
which
little bit more
is
effort
specific authors and artists talking
about them
about
and their career.
themselves. I mean, I almost feel like well, I guess Origins kind of covers like the creative process itself.
Hmm. And
But
so does Mirage in a way too, but not yours. It's going to be on Robert Heinlein's, or
right,
in our
right.
case, it's the folklore that kind of
Yeah.
builds it or wounds itself through our society.
What I like about Mirage is that, it's speculative, so you
Yeah.
can't be wrong because 'cause you're just entering into it saying, "I have no fucking idea, this is just my opinion,"
Yeah,
and
this can be
so
anything. Just
yeah.
let's put some words behind it and
Let's
flesh
see
it
what
out real quick.
happens, yeah. Let's just row.
Why not? I mean, I got my
Oh,
degree
oh,
in English, so I
cool.
mean,
Well,
what
that's
can you
interesting. I wonder what your,
do?
I know, like, what matches with that
I don't know.
matches, but is also different enough, that is important enough for you that it's a subject that you wanna explore. Is it the
Exactly.
creative writing process itself and topics about that? Because I like, I really liked hearing about not just an individual's artistic process, but, like, when you were saying the actual thing that you do, where you go back and you right from the beginning. Like, not just like, "Oh, here's my whole kind of about me and how I got started," but like, "This is what I do. I light a candle, I pour myself a cup of coffee on the 3rd Sunday of every month, and I sit down." I mean, people publish whole books about that, but I like how you're saying, "Okay, what do you do when you get stuck? Okay, now you're in your 3rd draft and you're stuck. Like, what's a way out of that?"
You know what
Almost
I've noticed? A lot of people that I talk to don't get stuck, or they don't claim to get stuck.
they're
They're
lying.
no, I do you get stuck? Because you push through. I know you do.
Of
When
course,
you're
but I still
exactly,
get
so you don't really get
stuck.
stuck.
No,
No,
I get
ever.
stuck. I get stuck. I mean, what is stuck? Do I have stuff that never saw the light of day and never will? Hell yeah. It's moldering in a leather satchel,
Less
and
and
you
less as you
won't
get
pay
older,
me
though,
to
I bet.
see it. My son can sell it if, I die
And
wealthy. He
become
can
famous.
sell it for something. He can eBay
Uh-oh.
it.
Well, what book was that called? The Kill a Mockingbird. The one that
Oh,
came out
this
right
the
before she
second
died.
one?
Yeah. I mean, you don't
Did you
want that. 'Cause what I hear is that was horrible and
Yeah, I
embarrassing to
didn't
that
I
poor
didn't
lady.
I didn't read it. I couldn't bring myself to read it, and I've totally forgotten the name of it, which is terrible because it's
Yeah.
pretty recent and kind of a big deal, but
Elder
Harper
abuse and all
Lee's
types of horrible stuff associated with that embarrassment. But yeah, I mean, you don't get stuck because you do. You work it out. I mean, a story doesn't have to be finished for you to. I mean,
Okay,
these people.
but
I
we're
mean,
talking
it's just
about, like, stuck in the writing part, like, actually where you're stuck in the story and you need a tool or a device, like, it's interesting to me to hear what other people do and not
yeah.
just, like, what your grand concept is or how you've become a writer or how you're successful at it, but, like, okay, I get all that. That's wonderful. Okay, that can be an origins, but we want to know what do you do when you read something and you go back in the morning and you reread it and you cringe and you think this is shit, or your editor says this is shit. What do you do? Like, what, not like, do you cry, but like, what is your actual process?
Get over yourself, right? I mean,
Yeah, I
basically,
mean,
it's
but
all
it's
you can.
different for everyone because some people might just fight back or stay true to whatever it is that they wrote. Some people might rewrite it. Some people might set it aside for, set it aside for 3 years and come back to it. I mean, I
That's the
don't
only
know.
thing you
It's
can do.
interesting to me. Yeah, it's almost like a creative writing class. You said you have a degree in English. Maybe you should do like a creative writing class online.
Talked to my last night podcast was with an adjunct professor at University of North Florida, and he said he can't find work anymore because the English departments are shrinking. Nobody wants a degree in English because they turned out to be worthless. So English departments are going the way of the dodo. They're extinct almost.
Right, because you can be a writer without having a degree in English.
Everybody wants to be a businessman or a doctor.
It's kind of like, the trades. There's this whole movement happening now to promote the trades as viable alternatives to college. I mean, like
Yeah.
all the Ask This Old House or the This Old House guys are totally promoting it because some people are not meant for college or they try college and it doesn't work.
Well,
And
our president said the other day that he plans on increasing the number of whatever you call them jobs that don't require a 4-year education. And I've also heard people throwing around the terms of wasting your money on a 4-year education or being ripped off by student loans or something along those lines.
yeah, I mean, I would say I've also heard people say that it's the best investment you can of your money you could ever make in your life. And I would say like I think that I don't think it's necessary, but I don't think it's an arbitrary, unnecessary thing. I think it's an individual thing, and some people need to find their way in a different fashion.
It's
Um,
completionist, isn't it, when you get a degree? It's like you're finishing something. And I think that's ultimately what it means for a
Guess
lot of
what?
people.
I don't have any degrees.
I gotta let you go. I only
And we're
talk to
done here.
educated people. And we're done. I will be sending you all the copies of your podcast with the elite stamped on top of it.
Rejected.
Rejected from
How
my.
dare you?
What did you try to get a
Yeah.
degree, or did you just said
Yeah,
screw
I
it, I'm not doing it?
did. I had a lot of I had a lot of like long, community college stints in creative writing and things of that nature. I didn't go straight to college from a teenage.
Non-traditional student.
I was a very non-traditional student. I didn't even graduate from a regular college. I dropped out and went on independent studies when I was like 15 and had this wonderful kind of one-on-one teacher who turned me on to all of this alternative literature. It was like basically I came to her and I said, I'm just this surly teen. I said, I will die if I have to read Hemingway.
Oh,
And she just like
oh
got
my
this
God,
huge grin on her
Hemingway's
face.
so good though.
She got this huge grin on her face and she handed me two books. She handed me A Handmaid's Tale by Margaret
I love
Atwood,
that one.
and
Yeah.
she handed me a, one of the books by Zora Neale Hurston. And I think it was The Bluest Eye, but it might have been a different book because I ended up going on to read all of her books, Zora Neale Hurston, and then of course Toni Morrison, who was her prodigy and wrote Beloved and all that stuff. But she was great, Eileen Parker. She just looked at me and she said, "Well, you don't have to do Hemingway." And she handed me these alternatives because to me, Hemingway, I like the concept of Hemingway. I love his like cats and his Key West and his cigars and his lifestyle, but his actual writing is just not, it just doesn't, it still to this day doesn't appeal to me. And it really did not appeal to 15-year-old surly teen me. I was like, who is this blowhard? So
What
that
about
it
Virginia Woolf?
never really got too into Virginia Woolf. I did read some Virginia Woolf, but wasn't like I didn't feel really connected with her. There were just oh, you it's such a personal thing, and that's why you should be, and again, like in the defense of higher education, what's important about it is that it exposes you to things that you might not like. And
Yeah,
how are you
exactly.
ever going to know what you like unless you are kind of given these things that you don't like? But I'm
Well,
not
it's
a
also
young
it
woman,
forces
so
those
you
it
go
forces those
back 30
greens down your throat.
years. If you go back 30 years, what was required reading when I was, entering high school is totally different than what's required reading now, for better or for worse. So, and to be quite frank, it was a very, misogynistic lineup.
Did you have to read Fahrenheit 451?
That was coming. And
Mm.
actually, I kind of regretted that I didn't get to that because I like science fiction. I did read like some George Orwell. We read 1984 and Animal Farm and stuff like that. So it wasn't that I was opposed to male authors, but that there was a distinct lack of strong female authors, unless you counted Shirley Jackson's The Lottery.
Mm,
There were very few like, here, read this novel and talk about it. That's not the case anymore. You talk to a 14-year-old today, and a 14-year-old young man probably has read The Handmaid's Tale, which is a groundbreaking science fiction at a time when women were not, even thought of as science fiction writers.
hmm.
She was really groundbreaking and, you know, brought up a lot of amazing concepts. We should talk about that kind of stuff sometime.
Her?
Uh, Margaret
Definitely.
Atwood, yeah, I've read
Yeah,
most
absolutely.
everything she's written. She's a voice, and the one downside of having such a strong voice, and this even happens with Stephen King, is that you can fatigue of that writer. Their voice is so strong. You're like, okay, I just cannot read another Margaret Atwood right now. Like, I'm just not in that mood, right? Hemingway's the same way. And you know what? For you, I will give Hemingway one more shot, because I do have a trip to Key West planned. I was invited to come down for a mermaid judging contest. I'm not a judge, although that would be badass. But I was invited to come down for like Miss Mermaid USA
Hey, there is a mermaid parade
in
in
Coney
Coney
Island.
Island. Yeah,
I know, and I've never been to it, so that's on my bucket list. Um,
we almost went last year. I think it's Mother's Day. It was Mother's Day last year. I don't know if it's always on Mother's Day though.
right, but it's always like mid-May.
It's always May or something like that. Yeah, just
That
remember
sounds
that.
a lovely thing. Anyway, so going Key West, gonna do the whole like gotta do the Hemingway thing. So I will give Hemingway.
What would you
um,
read though?
I don't know, something
Fairway to
short,
Arms is one of my
the
favorite.
shortest
The
possible.
old man in the sea. It wasn't like 100
No,
pages.
anything but that. Anything but that. I already know what happens.
I've only read the beginning of it. I've only read a few of his works, but I
Okay,
mean,
well, you tell
he's.
me. You think on that and tell me what you think is the best.
I would tell you to read Farewell to Arms. I think it's a really good World War One
Actually, that
war fiction.
may have read that. That might have been the one Hemingway that I read. Um,
And then
yeah.
the others are short stories. I mean, Hills Like White Elephants, and it's
Well, yeah, we
like
were all
his
forced to read
collection,
Hemingway at some point,
right?
I just
I'm not gonna say that he's not living very well contemporarily. People don't look very fondly on him. I mean, you think about Hemingway, you think of a suicide, don't you?
Right,
Think
no,
about
I
his.
don't, and that like the cool. That's what I'm saying. I like who he like. I like the story of Hemingway,
He's an interesting
just
dude.
as I
Like he
love
was a
the
man's
story of
man,
Jack
but he kind
London.
of had like that stolen valor situation
Yeah,
too,
he
where
was
he
a man's
pretended
man.
to be
Yes.
pretended to be
So
a
maybe
soldier, but
now that
never
I'm
really
becoming
was.
more of a jock, I'll be more into him.
I don't know. Was he a jock? He was a sportsman.
I
He
don't
liked
know.
his
He was manly,
bull fighting,
He was
and
very manly. So, I live in Minnesota now. I think I need to embrace.
wait, was he a Minnesota? I think he was a Minnesotan.
I
Was he?
don't know, but I am, and there's
But
plenty
you're
of
not. Are you originally? You're a
manliness.
Californian
Oh
originally.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes. I'm uh, through and through. I am a Californian.
No, you're more than welcome to come back on and discuss
I am
Margaret
like totally
Atwood.
a Californian, in case you can't tell.
Occasionally, it sneaks out.
I have to do that once in a while just to make sure I'm not developing a, Midwestern accent. I have to
What
drop in.
made you move to the Midwest?
Oh, that's such a long story. But this great apartment that I had for almost 20 years in San Francisco, the was being sold and the rents had gone up, and I had already been thinking about moving somewhere else. So I don't know. I I'm not gonna lie, but I essentially put a pin in a map, like randomly. I know that sounds totally crazy, but other things I've done that before in my life and other great things have happened. So I I put a pin in my map and I was like, where the hell is that? Okay. So I'm trying it out. There's a lot of snow.
Is this your first winter?
Second.
And you fell and almost died.
I did not, no, I didn't almost die, but I did fall.
Yeah, that's horrible.
And you
Head
want to know what's
injuries.
really embarrassing is that I wasn't doing anything glamorous like, oh, I was ice skating or I was rescuing a kitten from the frozen pond. We had like a little ice area, like kind of like a fake rank, and we were curling. This is during the Olympics, and we were like
Wow.
doing our own curling match. And I all I did was, and you do it kind of down on your knees, and I got up and I just, my foot just went out underneath me, and it just that I hit the ice, and I'm, you know, a 40-something-year-old woman, so I just couldn't take it. My body couldn't take it.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it happens, isn't it? Just like something stupid like playing
Yeah.
curling and boom, you bump your head and next thing you
At
know.
least it was never something awesome. It's never something like,
Oh,
I was jet skiing across, like, Mediterranean island, and it's like,
no, it was I forgot the napkin in the kitchen and I tripped over the freaking single step that I've
sitting
been
out the
stepping up my
grass,
entire life.
and I fell and garbage fell all over me, or like,
God, I
I
fell
stepped
down
on my
my
kid's
stairs.
toy.
I have like a set of
I fall
stairs
down
I
my
go
own
down.
stairs all the time, but
Oh
now
my
I'm so
God.
paranoid about re-hitting my head.
So
But
dumb. I mean, it's something you do every single day, and the one day that your heel catches your big toe and you're dead.
it's like, yeah. Or
Be
you
a
could be like
ghost.
Natalie Wood and be driving in your scarf. Not Natalie. Was it
No,
Natalie
yeah,
Wood
she
that
died. She drowned.
she drowned? Who was the one that her scarf choked her? Hold on, it's in my book. Her scarf totally choked her. It's in my section on famous celebrity deaths. And then I'm gonna let you go.
Yeah,
Um,
I might split this podcast in half.
I know, so long. I didn't even know we were like. I mean, I knew we were recording because you just record the whole thing, but I was hoping we kind of had ended it like 20 minutes ago, as far as what anyone was gonna hear.
I
Now
might
I
split
can't
it.
find it anywhere. There was this, God, what was her name? She was a famous dance, Isadora Duncan. I didn't even find it. That's what it was. She strangled on her own scarf. It got caught in the wheel of her. She was in a convertible, and it got caught in the wheel, and it strangled her, and she wrecked her car and died.
Celebrity deaths. I bet the
So
woman
on
who
that
was
note,
decapitated on a desert road, just driving along, boom, hit a truck, sliced their head off.
done,
Jane
donezo.
Manson. What's
Jane,
her name?
Jane, Jane, Man-
Jan Manfield?
Jane
Mansfield?
Mansfield?
Is that who I'm thinking about? She had, you know, she was. I think she was just a Playboy model. I think that's
Yeah,
all she
yeah,
was.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think she was ever in any movies or whatever,
That's
but
who.
she
Yes, yes.
is
I think.
famous for dying very horribly.
Yeah. Well, famous for Whitney Houston,
Yeah, I think that was more peaceful than anything, though.
I
I think she
guess,
was
but it's
onto
just like
pharmaceuticals and
can't help it. Like at the end, you're just thinking of that instead of it's just so sad. Anyway, that's not as brutal as being strangled by your own scarf or
or
dying in a plane crash or something like
curling accident.
that. Book sales will skyrocket though.
Known paranormal writer dies playing curling.
I will say this. This is probably going to curse my own luck, but I did say to my publisher, let me know if book sales slump and I'll fake my own death.
Start another nom de plume as a fiction author.
Yes, nobody needs to know. You don't know the real me.
So yeah, we can get away from doing just holidays. I mean, that was never the intention with you
Oh, I
anyway.
know. Oh, of course not. But that just kind of comes up because of,
Mhm.
things. But yeah, I mean,
I mean, I'd rather just because you already have a hook with your supernatural, not supernatural, but your paranormal
and you
background
know
in
what's
literature.
unusual about you is that almost every time, 99% of the time, when I'm being interviewed by someone who hosts a paranormal podcast or a radio show. And then the other 1 to 2% are like, a segment, the weird news segment on a national radio show. And you're really the only person who I regularly talk to that isn't actually in the same genre. Like you're not a paranormal podcaster.
Mm-mm.
So it's interesting because I forget that sometimes, like, well, he's not going to want to hear about that because that's
No,
like
I
not,
want to hear about it all. I'm incredibly interested in any stories. I mean, I don't know what you're going to say. So, I
you
mean, you
never
drop
know.
nuggets all the time, and I just pick them up.
Yeah, I mean,
I let you stain my brain with whatever whatever's on your mind, and that just like
LSD
guide
and
the
a Ouija
conversation.
board. Like, there you go. That's your nugget for tonight.
Ouija board. I mean, I don't really, I like you said, I don't write supernatural stuff or paranormal stuff. I don't even write the stuff. I mean, I'd like to reach a little bit deeper and try to pen some original supernatural or paranormal stories. I just feel like everything's already been told,
Well,
right? I
it's
mean, it's so hard.
oh, you could apply that to anything, though. You could say that about anything. You could say, like, science fiction, everything's been told. Although science fiction does lend itself to the very idea that nothing's been told, that we don't know anything, that everything's being hidden
Yeah,
from us.
exactly. Every single day, if you're looking in the right place, you're discovering a new tidbit about science that wasn't known the day before.
Yeah.
And that could spawn a whole novel. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
brilliant
And that's totally like,
genre.
and that crosses right over into like, horror and science fiction are, they're like twinsies as
Yeah.
far as that goes. I
You
mean,
can have
it's
monsters and stuff, but I really like fantasy and things where you could just make anything up. I mean, just make it up. If you want it, create a whole mythology around it. It's just
right.
beautiful.
It's like, why not? Yeah, you can travel through time and like totally make out with a mermaid. That's entirely possible.
I imagine they have very sharp teeth and they're very slimy mouths, cold.
It's totally not what it looks like,
Eh,
right?
you would not. I mean, yeah, you're going to get in close there, and you're going to regret the decision to make out with
Quite
a mermaid.
honestly, they get you with the tits.
Yeah, it's. I mean, God, yeah. I
You're not
mean,
looking at their mouths. That's the thing.
maybe. I mean, both at the same time. They, oh, I can't help it. You jump in. Next thing you know,
Can't help yourself. Beautiful voice. Yeah, you're not
oh,
really. It's not the voice.
it's fish food now. I mean, I
What
guess
do
it
you
wouldn't
mean you
matter.
can't breathe? Of course you can breathe. Just relax.
3 minutes, 2 minutes, a minute, you're done. I mean, I guess that's not a bad way to go.
It's probably not. Could be
Do you
worse.
want
You're being
to?
decapitated as you're driving down the highway.
Oh my God! And you're probably on some really good '70s drugs too. So,
Oh, bummer.
right, you get to enjoy the last moment of surge of adrenaline or whatever.
Thanks.
Well, thank you.
All
Talk to
right,
you
then. It's a good ending. All right. Rocket countdown. That's always do with my son if we're trying to end a call. It's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, good night.